Chapter 6 of The Cat of Bubastes, A Tale of Ancient Egypt. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Cat of Bubastes, by G. A. Henty. Chapter 6. Fowling and Fishing. The tents, which were made of light cloth intended to keep off the night dews rather than to afford warmth, were soon pitched, fires were lighted with fuel that had been brought with them in order to save time in searching for it, and Rabah went off to search for fish and fowl. He returned in half an hour with a peasant carrying 4 ducks and several fine fish. "We shall do now," he said. "With these and the stag our larder is complete. Everything but meat we have brought with us." Chebron, although he had kept on bravely, was fatigued with his walk and was glad to throw himself down on the sand and enjoy the prospect, which to him was a new one, for he had never before seen so wide an expanse of water. When on the top of the hill he had made out a faint dark line in the distance, and this Rabah told him was the bank of sand that separated the lake from the Great Sea. Now from his present position this was invisible, and nothing but a wide expanse of water stretching away until it seemed to touch the sky met his view. Here and there it was dotted with dark patches which were, Rabah told him, clumps of waterfowl, and in the shallow water near the margin, which was but a quarter of a mile away, he could see vast numbers of wading birds, white cranes, and white and black ibises, while numbers of other waterfowl, looking like black specks, moved about briskly among them. Sometimes with loud cries a number would rise on the wing, and either make off in a straight line across the water or circle round and settle again when they found that their alarm was groundless. "It is lovely, is it not?" he exclaimed to Amuba, who was standing beside him leaning on his bow and looking over the water. Amuba did not reply immediately, and Chebron looking up saw that there were tears on his cheeks. "What is it, Amuba?" he asked anxiously. "It is nothing, Chebron, but the sight of this wide water takes my thoughts homeward. Our city stood on a sea like this, not so large as they say is this great sea we are looking at, but far too large for the eye to see across, and it was just such a view as this that I looked upon daily from the walls of our palace, save that the shores were higher." "Maybe you will see it again some day, Amuba," Chebron said gently. Amuba shook his head. "I fear the chances are small indeed, Chebron. Jethro and I have talked it over hundreds of times, and on our route hither we had determined that if we fell into the hands of harsh masters, we would at all hazards try some day to make our escape; but the journey is long and would lie through countries subject to Egypt. The people of the land to be passed over speak languages strange to us, and it would be well nigh impossible to make the journey in safety. Still we would have tried it. As it is, we are well contented with our lot, and should be mad indeed to forsake it on the slender chances of finding our way back to the land of the Rebu, where indeed, even if we reached it, I might not be well received, for who knows what king may now be reigning there. And if you could get away and were sure of arriving there safely, would you exchange all the comforts of a civilized country like Egypt for a life such as you have described to me among your own people? There can be no doubt, Chebron, that your life here is far more luxurious, and that you are far more civilized than the Rebu. By the side of your palaces our houses are but huts. We are ignorant even of reading and writing. A pile of rushes for our beds and a rough table and stools constitute our furniture, but perhaps after all one is not really happier for all the things you have. You may have more enjoyments, but you have greater cares. I suppose every man loves his own country best, but I do not think that we can love ours as much as you do. In the first place, we have been settled there but a few generations, large numbers of our people constantly moving west, either by themselves or joining with one of the peoples who push past us from the Far East. Beside, wherever we went we should take our country with us, build houses like those we left behind, live by the chase or fishing in one place as another, while the Egyptians could nowhere find a country like Egypt. I suppose it is the people more than the country, the familiar language, and the familiar faces and ways. I grant freely that the Egyptians are a far greater people than we, more powerful, more learned, the masters of many arts, the owners of many comforts and luxuries, and yet one longs sometimes for one's free life among the Rebu. One thing is, Amuba, you were a prince there and you are not here. Had you been but a common man, born to labor, to toil, or to fight at the bidding of your king, you might perhaps find that the life even of an Egyptian peasant is easier and more pleasant than yours was." "That may be," Amuba said thoughtfully, "and yet I think that the very poorest among us was far freer and more independent than the richest of your Egyptian peasants. He did not grovel on the ground when the king passed along. It was open to him if he was braver than his fellows to rise in rank. He could fish, or hunt, or till the ground, or fashion arms as he chose. His life was not tied down by usage or custom. He was a man, a poor one perhaps, a half savage one if you will, but he was a man, while your Egyptian peasants, free as they may be in name, are the very slaves of law and custom. But I see that the meal is ready, and I have a grand appetite." "So have I, Amuba. It is almost worth while walking a long way for the sake of the appetite one gets at the end." The meal was an excellent one. One of the slaves who had been brought was an adept at cooking, and fish, birds, and venison were alike excellent, and for once the vegetables that formed so large a portion of the ordinary Egyptian repast were neglected. "What are we going to do tomorrow, Rabah?" Chebron asked after the meal was concluded. "I have arranged for tomorrow, if such is your pleasure, my lord, that you shall go fowling. A boat will take you along the lake to a point about 3 miles off where the best sport is to be had. Then when the day is over it will carry you on another 8 miles to the place I spoke to you of where good sport was to be obtained. I shall meet you on your landing there, and will have everything in readiness for you." "That will do well," Chebron said. "Amuba and Jethro, you will, of course, come with me." As soon as it was daylight Rabah led Chebron down to the lake, and the lad with Amuba and Jethro entered the boat, which was constructed of rushes covered with pitch and drew only 2 or 3 inches of water. 2 men with long poles were already in the boat. They were fowlers by profession, and skilled in all the various devices by which the waterfowl were captured. They had, during the night, been preparing the boat for the expedition by fastening rushes all round it. The lower ends of these dipped into the water, the upper ends were 6 feet above it, and the rushes were so thickly placed together as to form an impenetrable screen. The boat was square at the stern, and here only was there an opening a few inches wide in the rushes to enable the boatman standing there to propel the boat with his pole. One of the men took his station here, the other at the bow, where he peered through a little opening between the rushes and directed his comrade in the stern as to the course he should take. In the bottom of the boat lay 2 cats who, knowing that their part was presently to come, watched all that was being done with an air of intelligent interest. A basket well stored with provisions and a jar of wine were placed on board, and the boat then pushed noiselessly off. Parting the reeds with their fingers and peeping out, the boys saw that the boat was not making out into the deeper part of the lake, but was skirting the edge, keeping only a few yards out from the band of rushes at its margin. "Do you keep this distance all the way?" Chebron asked the man with the pole. The man nodded. "As long as we are close to the rushes the waterfowl do not notice our approach, while were we to push out into the middle they might take the alarm, although we often do capture them in that way; but in that case we get to windward of the flock we want to reach, and then drift down slowly upon them. But we shall get more sport now by keeping close in. The birds are numerous, and you will soon be at work." In 5 minutes the man at the bow motioned his passengers that they were approaching a flock of waterfowl. Each of them took up his bow and arrows and stood in readiness, while the man in the stern used his pole even more quickly and silently than before. Presently at a signal from his comrades he ceased poling. All round the boat there were slight sounds, low contented quackings and flutterings of wings, as the birds raised themselves and shook the water from their backs. Parting the rushes in front of them, the 2 lads and Jethro peeped through them. They were right in the middle of a flock of wild fowl who were feeding without a thought of danger from the clump of rushes in their midst. The arrows were already in their notches, the rushes were parted a little further, and the 3 shafts were loosed. The twangs of the bows startled the ducks, and stopping feeding they gazed at the rushes with heads on one side. 3 more arrows glanced out, but this time one of the birds aimed at was wounded only, and uttering a cry of pain and terror it flapped along the surface of the water. Instantly, with wild cries of alarm, the whole flock arose, but before they had fairly settled in their flight, two more fell pierced with arrows. The cats had been standing on the alert, and as the cry of alarm was given leaped overboard from the stern, and proceeded to pick up the dead ducks, among which were included that which had at first flown away, for it had dropped in the water about 50 yards